I'm Gene Benson, and my cohort there that's assisting me is Wayne Wisser. He's out in California. I am in western New York State, just west of Rochester, New York, pretty close to Lake Ontario. So we have the whole country covered here between us. Welcome to all of you who are joining us today. Welcome to our webinar, Avoiding the Fuel-Related Accident. And we're sponsored today by Avemco Insurance. I want to really thank the folks at Avemco for making these presentations possible. Avemco is a sponsor of the FAST team, as you may or may not know, and those are the folks who pay for the wings that we receive when we complete a phase of wings. Those wings we can wear on our hat or our jackets or whatever we want to do, so we thank them. Let's start with just a bit of housekeeping. We always begin live seminars. We point out where the emergency exits are. In this case, I'm going to leave it up to you to figure out where your emergency exit is, and also I hope you know where your bathroom is. Our emergency would be some sort of a system crash on my end. It's unlikely, but nothing's impossible. If that happens, just check my website, genebenson.com, for information on when we will reschedule to begin again. All right, if you don't know me, I am, as I said, Gene Benson. Really quick introduction of myself. My whole life has revolved around aviation. Can't remember when I didn't want to fly. Took my first official flying lesson at age 14, and I sold on my 16th birthday. That was in 1962, so those of you who are math majors can figure that out. I had a great career for which I am very thankful. I've flown everything from jets to Cubs, everything in between. Flight instructing has always been my preferred activity, though, as my mother told me, that's very dangerous, but I found out it was dangerous because you might starve to death as opposed to other reasons. But I always had other things going on, but that was my favorite. I've given more than 8,000 hours of dual instruction. I've continued with my psychology background to do work in human factors. So for 5 years, I served on the safety committee of the National Business Aviation Association as the human factors person in their fitness for duty working group. I was also an annual presenter at the NBAA convention for a while. I'm a FAST team lead representative, and enough about me. Our objectives today. We want to identify 3 types of fuel-related accidents. We want to identify some steps that can be taken to help reduce the risk of us having a fuel-related accident. And I want to identify some possible underlying causes of some fuel-related accidents. And those of you who know me know that that's going to take a human factors turn. Okay, I really don't like beginning a presentation with statistics, but we do need to put this in perspective. This graphic is from the most recent Joseph T. Null report, which is dated 2016, so that covers the data for 2015. So not real recent, but best we got. Note that we are only looking at non-commercial flying and fixed-wing aircraft here. The report covers all kinds of things, but we're just looking at this. This slide addresses 3 types of fuel-related accidents. They call it flight planning, system operation, and contamination. I'm going to call them a little bit different, but you'll see. The numbers, they're a bit hard to read because they're small, and we do have some people attending by audio only, so I will state them. Fuel-related accidents that arose from flight planning, or I guess from a lack thereof, totaled 31 for that year, with 4 of them involving a fatality. System operation accidents totaled nearly the same, being at, what was the number, 30 for them, including 3 with a fatality. There were 2 accidents resulting from fuel contamination, and neither of those was fatal. We're going to look at fuel-related accidents in basically the same way. We'll use this nomenclature, though. Our 3 types will be fuel exhaustion, fuel management, and fuel contamination. Fuel exhaustion, well, that occurs when the engine consumes all the usable fuel available aboard the airplane. I have referred to that as having too much air in the fuel tanks. This fuel exhaustion accident involved a Cessna 182, happened in Vermont in September 2013. The pilot and his passenger received minor injuries. Though the official report calls the injuries minor, the 2 men involved probably didn't think so at the time. I obtained some photos of first responders at work at the accident scene, and it wasn't pretty. The pilot reported the Ntsb pilot and passengers' faces hit control panel requiring stitches in noses. The pilot's left wrist was broken from the control yoke. Now, before I go on with this, those of you who have followed my work, you know where I'm going. This 1962 airplane was not equipped with shoulder harnesses. The harnesses would probably not have prevented the broken wrist, but the severe lacerations probably could have been avoided. I have vowed never again to fly in an airplane that's not equipped with shoulder harnesses, and I would encourage everybody else to do the same. Any airplane, I think, can be retrofitted with at least front seat harnesses relatively inexpensively as things go in aviation. And the statistics on survivability, not just survivability, but avoiding serious accidents is just overwhelming that shoulder harnesses are really important. All right, back to our accident. The pilot departed on a nice, clear day from a small private airport in Hero, Vermont. That's just a bit north of the Burlington International Airport, as we see here in the graphic. The departure did not have fuel available. The departure airport did not have fuel available. The Ntsb report does not indicate the intended destination of the flight, but the report states this. The pilot reported that he elected to refuel while en route to his destination instead of other airports located near the departure airport. The red line here indicates the approximate flight path, and the red circles indicate airports with fuel available. Here's a larger view showing the departure point as well as the intended fuel stop at Glens Falls, New York. The problem was that the annual Hot Air Balloon Festival was underway at Glens Falls, and the airport was no-tammed closed. So the pilot elected to divert to Rutland, Vermont, as we can see in the other arrow there. This is a closer view of the area showing the proposed diversion route. The Ntsb report states, at the time, he noticed that the airplane's fuel gauges were bouncing off empty. That is not a good situation to be in. And I've flown a lot around that part of the world, and the landing sites there are few and far between. The airplane subsequently experienced a total loss of engine power due to fuel exhaustion, and the pilot performed a forced landing to a field, which resulted in substantial damage to the firewall and forward portion of the fuselage. The pilot stated that he did not experience any mechanical malfunctions with the airplane, and had he received a full weather briefing prior to the flight, he would have known about the closed airport and planned accordingly. Sounds like an expensive lesson to have learned. Our pilot was 65 at the time of the accident. He holds a private pilot certificate, single engine land rating. At the time of the accident, he possessed a current Class 3 medical certificate, and he had a current flight review. He reported to have 3,654 hours total flight time, including 2,852 hours in the Cessna 182. So it certainly seems that he should have been familiar with the rate of the fuel burn in that airplane with all that time in it. And that might just be the problem. Let's take a quick look at this through the lens of human factors. We cannot know the pilot's thoughts, but we can look at some typical scenarios. Remember that complacency is composed of familiarity and expectancy. He was very familiar with the fuel burn and would have been just fine had the airport of choice been open. But he wouldn't have had very much fuel remaining. Perhaps he had cut the fuel close in other flights and it worked out fine. Each time we cut something close and get away with it, we're positively reinforced to do that again and also to press the envelope a little bit more the next time. So perhaps he had developed an expectancy that it was okay to cut it close on fuel, especially on a nice clear day when it was unlikely that weather would become a problem. We still doing okay there, Lane? Uh-oh. Are we still there? Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Gene?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, we're doing okay.
Yep, still looking good. There's one person at least that still can't get it on YouTube, but otherwise we're fine.
Yeah, I think it did not launch on YouTube, and you know, I can't really stop to worry about that, so I guess we'll just have to let that go for this one. Apologize to anybody trying to get that on YouTube. Okay, again, we don't know the pilot's thoughts, but this accident perhaps illustrates another human factor, causal factor, lack of awareness. This is different from a lack of knowledge. This is when we know or understand something but are unaware of some pertinent bit of information. In this case, the pilot knew about the fuel burn of the airplane, and he knew about needing enough fuel. He also knew that NOTAMs are issued when an airport is to be closed, and he knew how to obtain that data. But he did not, by his own admission, seek a full pre-flight briefing, and he was unaware that his planned refueling stop was closed for a special event. All right, let's look at another one. Even highly experienced pilots flying multi-engine turboprop airplanes are not immune from fuel exhaustion accidents. The 7,000-hour plus pilot escaped injury when he was forced to land on a road due to fuel exhaustion in his Beech King Air. And this was the B-200. This is the big King Air too. Before departure, the pilot performed fuel calculations and determined that he had enough fuel to fly to the intended destination. While en route, the pilot flew around thunderstorms. Aha. On arrival at the destination, the pilot executed the instrument landing system approach to runway 16. On short final, the right engine experienced a total loss of power. The pilot switched the fuel flow from the right tank to the left tank. The left engine experienced a total loss of power then, and the pilot made an emergency landing on a road. A post-accident examination revealed only a few gallons of unusable fuel in the left fuel tank. Right fuel tank, well, that was breached during the accident sequence, but there was no fuel smell noticed afterward. The pilot performed another fuel calculation after the accident, and determined that there were actually 170 gallons of fuel on board, not 230 gallons like he originally figured when he departed. The Ntsb probable cause finding states the pilot's improper fuel planning and management, which resulted in a loss of engine power due to fuel exhaustion. Here's an excerpt from the pilot operator report that the pilot submitted to the Ntsb. I'm going to read it for the benefit of those listening to this presentation with only audio. It gives the end number of the airplane, departed the airport in Springfield, Tennessee at approximately 6:40 p.m. on June 25th, 2013. I had on file an IFR flight plan to Wheeling, Illinois. My flight plan was figured on my iPad to take 1 hour, 13 minutes. Added 12 minutes to the flight plan in time to deviate if necessary. Not a lot of deviation time. I figured my fuel reserve from the last trip the aircraft was flown from Dallas, Texas to Springfield, Tennessee as 230 gallons, which gave me the required flight time plus 45 minutes reserve. I have since the accident refigured the fuel required for the trip and have found that I made an error of approximately 30 gallons of fuel per side. 30 gallons per side. My flight plan was opened when I reached 6,200 feet, and the trip actually required 1 hour 47 minutes en route because thunderstorms increased in intensity, requiring approximately a 70 nautical mile deviation. The error in calculating the fuel on the previous trip and the added deviation caused fuel exhaustion. The terrain in the area where the accident occurred was nearly level. The accident was all confined in a 100-foot area. And then it goes on. A top-off fuel at M91 Springfield, Tennessee would have left more than adequate fuel for the trip instead of relying on my calculations that were flawed. I have more than 39 accident-free flying years to my record before this accident. I have learned a valuable lesson to always depart with the most fuel on board that is practical. To improve my skills, going to SYNCOM for retraining, and he'll follow through with the results of the explanation of that. Okay, what about our pilot? He's 57 years old at the time of the accident, commercial pilot certificate, single and multi-engine land ratings, and an instrument rating. He possessed a current Class 3 medical certificate, and he had a current flight review. He reported to have 7,125 hours total flight time, including 572 hours in the Beech King Air. So, what do we say about that? Well, again, our lack of awareness comes up. The pilot was certainly, the accident was certainly caused by a lack of awareness. The pilot was not aware of how much fuel was on board the airplane. Why not? Perhaps he'd become complacent in making certain there was enough fuel. By his admission, he learned a valuable lesson to always depart with the most fuel on board the airplane as practical. And, you know, it's one of those things, we all say we're going to do that, but then, you know, well, it's going to take a little bit extra time to get the fuel. There are a lot of reasons we don't and we depart, and sometimes it doesn't end well. All right. Here's some hints from an old pilot, me. Of course, do your flight planning and include a reserve. Never plan on less than a 45-minute reserve, regardless of what the regulations permit. You know, for VFR, they say 30 minutes, and VFR day, 30 minutes, but 45 minutes is, it's a little too minimum for me, and I know it depends on the airplane, and there are a lot of factors involved. If you're carrying weight, you can't carry all the fuel, and I know there's a lot involved, but I'm a whole lot more comfortable with an hour reserve, regardless of what's going on. But, you know, sometimes you can't do that. I learned that lesson. I just digress, tell you a very quick story. Many years ago, I won't go through all the details, and I was flying charters in a Piper Navajo Chieftain, and I was in the Northeast, and, you know, I knew the weather was not real great, and I know I had more than my 45 minutes of reserve. I'm not sure how much I have. I know it was more than 45 minutes. It was probably closer to an hour reserve. But all of a sudden, these thunderstorms started popping up, and there was ice everywhere, and I had to do a lot of deviating. And I finally got to the airport, my destination airport, and I was still good on fuel. And I started the ILS. I was cleared for the ILS, and I rolled onto the localizer, and I'm just about ready to do the glide slope, and the tower tells me, go around, go around, go around. Great, why? The runway had gotten icy, and the airplane ahead of me had slid off the runway. Unfortunately, not totally off the runway, so I had to go around. So I went back up into the problem, and they then closed the airport because it was getting so bad. So now I had to divert to an airport about 40, maybe closer to 50 miles away, and shot an ILS there. Weather still wasn't good, but I'd done a lot of screwing around in the meantime. And you know, they say the fuel gauge is bouncing off the pegs. Yeah, well, there we go. And I landed, I got on the ground, and I rolled out, and just as I turned off onto a taxiway, the left engine quit. So I added power on the right engine, and just as I got to the ramp, that engine quit. I was totally out of fuel. So that, you know, that got my attention. And I said, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to always have way more fuel or not fly when the weather is this questionable. Anyway, okay, rule number 2 from the old pilot. Know your rate of fuel consumption for the airplane you are flying today. If you're using performance data from the manufacturer, increase it by at least 8%. Yeah, the airplane may not perform quite as well as the day it was new. You may not lean the mixture quite as much as you know, the factory would say. So leave lots of reserve, but also add this extra margin to your fuel consumption. And know how much fuel you have on board, like this last pilot. Don't guess. Know how much fuel you have on board. And if for any reason you can't figure that out, and I know sometimes you can't, if in doubt, top it off, weight and balance permitting. If not, put as much in it as you can with a weight and balance permitting. It just isn't worth messing around with. And finally, our last rule from the old pilot, convert gallons to time. It doesn't matter how many gallons you got. It matters how much time you have. So convert gallons to time. Fuel gauges are notoriously unreliable. And I won't mention which manufacturer, but I think we all know which ones are totally unreliable. Always note takeoff time and write it down. I'll say it again. Note the takeoff time and write it down. And then let's go old school. Use your Rolex or your Timex or whatever you got to track how long you've been flying, because that really is your fuel gauge. It's your watch, not your fuel gauge on the airplane. All right, we can pause for some discussion if anybody wants to talk about anything we talked about so far. Wayne can assist me here. If you can find your controller, raise your hand. I tell you where it was, but I don't know. There's a hand up. Tom, I'm trying to open your mic. Tom, go for it. No, your mic's still muted. Are you there, Tom? You're muted on your end, because not on my end. All right. Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Tom.
No, that's me, Gene.
Oh, that's Wayne. Okay. Okay. I don't see any other hands up, so I guess we will move on in that case. All right. Oh, there's another hand up. William. William's hand went up. Go ahead, William. William? Not having any luck with this today. William, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. My plane has analog fuel gauges and digital fuel gauges, and none of them are accurate, or certainly not. So I agree with you completely that, you know, I always want to have, I want to have, usually I want to have more than 1 hour. My plane burns lean a peak. It's a Cirrus SR22T, and lean a peak on that is about 15 gallons an hour. But 15 gallons an hour, I don't feel comfortable with. So I usually try to figure for 30 gallons an hour or 30 extra gallons. That gives me 2 hours. And I feel a lot comfortable, primarily, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of them is because I get nervous looking at the fuel gauges.
Yeah, I hear you.
I mean, you know, it's like, God. It's really unnerving. You know, I mean, you look at the fuel gauges and you just I start to sweat. And then I switch, I've got the perspective panel, and I switch to the engine panel with the fuel gauge. And, you know, I don't know I don't know what to believe, so I don't believe anything. I'm kind of with you.
Yep, know what your fuel consumption is and believe your watch. That's the bottom line. There are a lot of fuel related accidents in airplanes with all kinds of digital fuel monitoring systems, and pilots still run out of fuel. So yeah, I know I'm old school, but I like to know how many gallons I got, how many gallons an hour I burn, and just do the math and write the time down and go from there. So, all right, thank you, William.
Okay.
All right, we will move on, and I will lower all the hands as they go. All right.
Gene?
Yes.
Before you move on, Tim's had one question.
Okay.
He doesn't have a mic, but he said he was wondering if fuel flow totalizers are recommended.
You know, they're a tool. They're a tool. There have been accidents with airplanes with fuel flow totalizers in them as well. I'm not really familiar with them a whole lot, but again, it's another tool. I think, though, that you can't beat knowing what the fuel consumption is, knowing how much fuel you got, knowing how much time you got, and just kind of keeping an eye on that. If you have to, set an alarm to remind you. There was an accident over the Adirondack Mountains back, it was probably in 2000, I'll say, maybe 2001. A father and son rented a Cessna 152 from an FBO, and it was October, and the trees were, you know, it was just beautiful fall foliage, and they were flying around the Adirondacks, and they just totally lost track of the time. They were having such a good time, and they just kept flying until the engine quit, and it was like, oh my goodness, how could it possibly have been 4 hours? But it was, and they went down in the trees. Nobody got seriously hurt. They got some scrapes, but it was the end of that airplane, unfortunately. And it also cost the FBO a fortune to recover it, because it was they couldn't just leave it there for environmental reasons. So I see another hand up. Edward. I think I unmuted you, Edward. Nope, you're not. I'm not seeing any microphone for you at all. So, okay. Oh, I have a note. It says, Allow to Talk is not available because Edward is under an older version of Zoom. So you need to update your Zoom, I guess, Edward. Sorry about that. All right, I'm going to...
Gene, you got one more?
Doug. I know Doug. Doug's a Cirrus guy also. I think I just unmuted you, Doug. No, I didn't. There you go. Doug, are you there? I'm clicking unmute, but you're still showing that you're muted on your end.
You may have.
Okay, I opened it up. How you doing, Gene?
Hey, Doug. Good. How are you?
Good, very nice. Yeah, just some complications with cutting your fuel too short. I do fly a Cirrus in certain models that I've had. The fillet to tabs, you can very clearly see that when you look in the wing tanks, but kind of anything below that, it's hard to judge exactly what you might have. So that's a danger, at least in the Cirrus that I'm familiar with. But also, if you let it go too low, you know, you finally get in the airport environment, you're on an I-5 flight plan, they're giving you turns and vectors and base to final, and you know, you only got a couple gallons in one wing and you tilt it up a few times and, you know, forget to switch to the other tank. And
Oh,
it's,
yeah.
danger.
Yep. Yeah, have enough. Have enough. All right, thank you, Doug. All right, we're going to move on in the interest of time here. Let's move on to, and I think, let me see here. I was trying to mute everybody, and I wasn't having any luck with that. If those of you who have microphones open would be so kind as to mute them, that would be good. I should have a control here to mute everybody, but I can't find it, so bear with me. All right. Moving on, fuel management. These are accidents in which the engine loses power due to a lack of fuel, but there was fuel available somewhere on board the airplane, not in a tank in the baggage compartment, but in another fuel tank. All right, the fuel management accident, this fuel management accident involved a Cessna 206 and a Part 135 air taxi operation. Happened in July of 2011 in Maine. The pilot and 2 of the 3 passengers received minor injuries, and the 3rd passenger received serious injuries. This is an amazing, this is just an amazing story. There we go. The pilot made the takeoff from the island airport. And at about 200 feet of altitude, the engine lost all power. The pilot was forced to ditch in the ocean. All aboard were able to exit the airplane before it sank. But for about an hour, they clung onto a section of the airplane's belly cargo pod that separated during the water impact. The operator's FAA-approved General Operations Manual Section 10, passenger handling, requires that the pilot give an oral safety briefing before each takeoff, which includes the location of the onboard survival equipment. In addition, a safety information card must be on board in a location convenient for use by each passenger on board. Interviews with the passengers revealed no safety briefing was provided before the takeoff. None of the passengers were aware that life vests or the safety information card were on board the airplane. Here's our first evidence of complacency on the part of the pilot. He was aware of the requirement to conduct a passenger briefing as part of an air taxi operation. Remember that even in our Part 91 operations, we're required to conduct a passenger briefing before takeoff. He had become complacent after many flights in which nothing went wrong. He was very familiar with flying, and he most likely developed an expectancy that everything would go as planned. It seems that perhaps this pilot had become complacent about other things, and maybe he had begun that, what I call the slide down the slippery slope of non-compliance. As an air taxi pilot, he was required to have at least a valid Class 2 medical certificate. But his Class 2 medical had expired and reverted to a Class 3 a little more than 2 months before the accident. So we're starting to see some evidence of a trend of complacency here. Here's where it gets interesting. The airplane was recovered from the ocean 5 days after the accident. The fuel selector was observed in the right fuel tank position. The right fuel tank contained about 1 pint of fuel, while the left tank contained, wait for it, 27 gallons of fuel. It would seem that the pilot did not use the before takeoff checklist requiring the fuel selector to be on the fullest tank. The pilot's statement indicated that as a response to the power loss, he immediately turned on the auxiliary fuel pump. He made no mention of switching fuel tanks, so it can be assumed that he took off on the tank with very little fuel in it. So again, we see complacency on the part of the pilot in not using a before takeoff checklist, or at least not properly complying with the checklist. Ntsb determined the probable cause, the pilot's improper fuel management, which resulted in a total loss of engine power due to fuel starvation. And now, if any of you are old enough to remember Paul Harvey, as Paul Harvey would have said, and now for the rest of the story, our pilot was a former airline pilot with more than $25,000. Now, compared to a Boeing 767 or similar airplane, a Cessna 206 is a small, simple airplane. Pretty easy to become complacent and have an attitude that things like briefings and checklists aren't really necessary in such a simple airplane. So I think this accident is a good example of human factors at work. Obviously, this pilot was not dumb or careless. He had a successful airline career. That doesn't happen for people who are dumb or are careless. His age did not allow him to fly for the airlines anymore at age 69, so he was flying as an air taxi pilot. It appears that he had become complacent and failed to follow procedures and failed to use his checklist. He's not the first airline pilot to fall into that trap. In a single pilot operation, he did not have a first officer to raise the red flag when procedures were not being followed. He didn't have a cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder capturing every action and every word. It probably seemed like a very relaxed operation after years of airline flying. Now, I know there are people out there who will raise the issue of possible early cognitive impairment based on this guy's age, but I researched this very thoroughly, and I couldn't, I can definitively say that, I can't definitively say it wasn't an issue, but I could not find any scrap of evidence that showed there was any cognitive impairment there at all. In my opinion, this was a simple case of complacency, and it was a fact of our humanness just taking over. All right. We can break for a moment here for some more questions or discussion if we have any. If not, we'll go on. Any questions? Any hands want to go up? No? All right.
Gene, there was a couple of questions I promised to pass along. One from Bob, and where did he go here?
Yeah, Lane's running the chat today. For some reason, I can't even see the chat today, so that's all up to you, Lane.
Okay, so Bob Dilk wanted to know, is there any aircraft that you cannot stick the fuel level on?
Well, to my knowledge, there is not, but that was why I didn't go there when I said, know how much fuel is there and find a method to do it, because there may very well, as soon as I say, oh, you can always stick the fuel, somebody will say, oh, I owned a whatever, and it barn burner 360, and now you can stick the fuel on that. I have never come across an airplane that you could not stick something, some calibrated device into the tank and see how much fuel is there, but I wouldn't say that there certainly wasn't one. Any other questions on the chat there, Wayne?
Yeah, there was one other question. I think I knew the answer, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway. Jude wanted to know if there was a way to get wings credits for this.
No, this is not a wings credit operation. That adds several layers of complexity to it, and I wouldn't be able to do as many webinars as I've been doing if I was doing that. It takes a good 10 hours after a webinar to sort through and issue all the wings credits, sort who's eligible, and it's I'd rather do more presentations right now. We may get to that point eventually. But.
Okay, Gene, and then you have one hand just came up with Neil Peterson.
Oh, there's Neil. Okay, let me see. I think I just opened your mic, Neil. Go for it. Maybe not. Try it again. I think they might be muted on your end. No? Not opening. All right, we will move on. This is interesting. Before we leave fuel management, we need to spend a moment in regard to our fuel selectors. Several accidents have been credited being due to mechanical failure of the fuel selector valve. Now, how is the fuel selector valve on the airplane you fly? Is it healthy? After you see this, I'm guessing you're going to want to run right out and check. The Ntsb is aware of this, and these are numbers from the Ntsb. In the 8 years beginning with 2008 and going through 2016, the Ntsb cited the fuel selector in 104 accidents. 104 accidents they blamed on the fuel selector. Okay. 63 of those involved incorrect use or operation of the fuel selector, and 28 cited degraded function of the fuel selector. Typically, these types of accidents result in fuel starvation and a loss of engine power. Now, worn fuel selectors have led to fuel starvation and loss of engine power, resulting in serious and, in some cases, fatal injuries. As fuel selectors wear, the fuel selector handles may be difficult or even impossible to turn. If a pilot applies too much force, the internal components can fracture and obstruct the fuel flow, resulting in a total loss of engine power. In addition, worn detents can make it difficult for a pilot to properly position the fuel selector to the desired tank. And of course, positioning the fuel selector incorrectly to an empty tank or in between tanks could ultimately starve the engine for fuel. And this is all from an Ntsb safety alert. And from that same safety alert, the Ntsb talked about a couple accidents here. This is an accident involving a Piper Tomahawk. The Ntsb states, although the fuel selector handle was positioned to the right main fuel tank, an insert in the fuel selector had fractured into multiple pieces that showed overstress and wear. The fuel selector handle likely had been difficult to move for some time, and excessive force would have been required to move the handle from one position to another, thus causing the wear. And then, of course, the wear caused it to get tough and it broke. The photos on the right show the debris from the fractured insert in the fuel valve. And this was a dual instruction accident. It was a flight school airplane. The instructor was seriously injured and the student died in the accident. Here's another one. This involved a Piper Cherokee 140. The Ntsb says, although the fuel selector valve handle was in the right tank position at the time of the accident, testing of the valve with air indicated that the valve was closed. The selector valve was stiff to rotate and positive engagement of the detents could not be consistently obtained. Disassembly of the valve revealed rotational scoring in the valve and on the plug cock, which had heavily worn detents. Debris was also found in the valve and was the result of excessive wear. You can see the photo of that there. This, the pilot was the sole occupant, and he died in the accident. And one more they list. This one involved a Mooney M20. The Ntsb says the fuel selector handle screw was loose and prevented the fuel selector from moving to the fuel tank position for the tank with usable fuel, resulting in fuel starvation and the subsequent total loss of engine power. This case, the pilot had a nice place to put it down, did a good job of doing so, and survived with only minor injuries. So, moral of the story, check that fuel selector in your airplane. It's the little things that get us sometimes. And what are we looking for? It should move nicely, and it should click in nicely. If it's way too loose, that's a problem. If it's really hard to move, that's a problem. Get maintenance to check it out. If it's not your airplane, report it to the FBO, or if you're in a flight club, report it to the director of maintenance for the flight club. Whatever you do, but don't keep going with a bad fuel valve. There's no future in it. All right, we're coming up more discussion there, but I think we'll continue on from there, and maybe we'll have some more time for discussion at the end. Let's talk about our third source of problems here, which is fuel contamination. That involves using fuel that contains water, sediments, or other foreign substances that prevent proper operation of the engine. Look at an accident. The Ntsb report contains the following description of the pilot's pre-flight inspection. The pilot stated that he arrived at Morristown Municipal Airport, MMU, about 09:45 and started the pre-flight inspection. He started with preheating the engine compartment. Now, this happened in February in New Jersey, so it was cold. He noted a total of 38.8 gallons of fuel in the tanks as indicated on the engine digital monitor, which agreed with the airplane's fuel gauges. He visually checked the fuel levels in the tanks, confirming the fuel monitor and fuel gauges. So far, so good. Before sumping the fuel tanks, he gently rocked the wings to dislodge any contamination that may be present. The left wing fuel tank sump valve seems stiff and was not easy to sump. That should be a flag. The right wing was unremarkable. 16 ounces of clear blue 100 low lead aviation fuel with no contaminants were drained from the gascolator. He sumped the left wing again and observed 16 ounces of blue 100 low lead aviation fuel with 2 to 3 drops of water. Aha, water. He completed the pre-flight and removed the heater. The startup, taxi, and ground run-up were unremarkable. The Ntsb report continues. After takeoff, the climb was continued to 1,000 feet at full throttle, and power was then adjusted to 23 inches manifold pressure with 2,300 RPMs. Thereafter, leveling the airplane at 1,800 feet. During the cruise to November 07, he monitored the carburetor heat gauge and adjusted as required. And the report continues. Nearing November 07, he started to descend to pattern altitude of 1,200 feet and entered the downwind for runway 01 on a 45-degree entry. On the downwind, he throttled back and adjusted the descent to an airspeed of 90 miles per hour, lowering the flaps to 10 degrees. He throttled back more to maintain the descent and applied full carburetor heat. Once abeam from the runway, he attempted to add power to slow the descent and noted no response from the engine. He pumped the throttle twice with no response and immediately established a best glide of 80 miles per hour, pumping the throttle and ensuring the carburetor heat was on, pulled out. He retracted the flaps and moved the fuel selector to the right wing fuel tank. He started the base leg and continued toward the runway. He pulled the engine fuel primer out and gave it a pump. The engine momentarily went to full power and died. He turned toward the runway and pumped the primer one more time. The engine went to full power and turned off. He tried it a third time, to no avail. He realized that the airplane was not going to reach the runway and elected to turn east toward a tree line. He flew the airplane into a tree to avoid hitting a building. You can see in the graphic there where the runway is and where the building that he would have hit. According to the responding FAA inspector, the airplane impacted a tree about 1/4 mile short of the approach end of runway 01 at November 07, adjacent to a parking lot. Damage to the airplane was consistent with the airplane in a nose below the horizon and right wing low attitude at the time of impact. The top wing section across the fuselage separated, exposing the cabin area. Forward and aft windshields were shattered. The left wing remained wrapped around the tree. The right wing's outboard leading edge was crushed. The fuselage came to rest on its right side. The empennage came to rest over the right wing, bent down toward the right. The engine and cowling separated from the firewall. The propeller remained attached to the engine. 2 of the 3 blades were bent aft, and all 3 blades were observed in a low pitch angle. I think this airplane is over. What do you think? Post-accident examination found ice and evidence of water in the gascolator fuel bowl shortly after the accident. A recovered engine digital monitor recorded the accident flight and captured the last 25 seconds. The monitor indicated that the fuel flow dropped to 0 and the exhaust gas temperature on all cylinders dropped sharply, consistent with ignition stopping abruptly, likely due to the introduction of water into the fuel system. The engine compartment was heated before the flight. The temperature was -5 degrees Celsius at the time of the pre-flight, and no water was noted when the gascolator was drained before the flight. Remember, gascolator had fuel in it after the accident. The accident flight was flown on the left wing fuel tank. The pilot stated that during the pre-flight, he had difficulty sumping the left wing fuel tank and noted a few drops of water when the sump valve did function. He did not resump the tank. An AD was established to prevent power loss or engine stoppage due to water contamination had been performed on the airplane. The AD stated that after rocking the wings, the pilot should drain and catch the contents of the fuel gascolator wing and, if equipped, reservoir tank sumps and check for water contamination. If water is found, repeat until no additional water is detected, or drain the entire airplane fuel system. End of quote on that one. About a week before the accident flight, the airplane was washed inside the hangar and afterward moved to the ramp. It had not been flown since the wash. The Ntsb determines the probable cause of this accident to be the pilot's inadequate pre-flight inspection, parenthesis, removal of water contamination from the fuel system, close parenthesis, which resulted in a total loss of engine power. All right, so the Ntsb says that the pilot's pre-flight inspection was inadequate. Let's review what actions the pilot took, and let's try to figure out where he went wrong. First, the Ntsb reports that the airplane was washed inside the hangar about a week prior to the accident, and this was the first flight after the wash. Okay. The surface temperature was -5 degrees Celsius. The hangar was apparently not heated, since the pilot stated that he began his pre-flight inspection by preheating the engine compartment. He reported that he gently rocked the wings to dislodge any contamination. Now, we don't know. How long did he wait to sump the tanks again? Rocking the wings may dislodge water contamination, but it takes a couple minutes for it to make its way to the lowest point, which is supposedly the drain valve. The left wing fuel tank sump valve seemed stiff and was not easy to sump. The right wing was unremarkable. Why was that left wing sump stiff? That should raise a red flag that something is wrong. In sub-freezing temperatures, we should suspect some ice. After all, the system did what it was supposed to do. Some water got into the system, either during the wash or through condensation or some other way. The water settled to the lowest point, which was the fuel drain. But the temperature was below freezing, so it froze. Now that drain is just screaming at us that it's frozen. A frozen drain can only mean one thing. There's water somewhere. That gasoline didn't freeze, okay? That water might be in the form of ice, which is likely to melt once that fuel starts sloshing around on it. The temperature was not that far below freezing. Now, had the temperature been minus 20, there might not have been a problem at all because that ice would have stayed frozen. 16 ounces of clear blue 100 low-lead aviation fuel with no contaminants was drained from the gascolator. He sumped the left wing again and observed 16 ounces of clear blue aviation fuel with, quote, 2 to 3 drops of water. Aha! Water is present, but it's only a couple drops. That won't hurt anything, will it? Ever heard the phrase, where there's smoke, there's fire? Well, how about the phrase, where there's drops, there's pints? The pilot reported that the startup, taxi, and ground run were unremarkable. So that water was hiding somewhere, and it was just ready to pounce at a bad time, okay? Let me digress to tell you a quick personal story that relates to that, too. And this is one where, try to learn from the experiences of others so you don't make the same mistakes. I'm going to give you a mistake I made. Nothing bad happened, but nevertheless, it was a mistake. Hope you can learn from it. Back in the 90s, probably the early to mid 1990s, I owned a flight school, and our multi-engine airplanes were Beechcraft Duchess. Well, they were a little bit hard to come by at the time, and one came for sale down south, and negotiated, and I went and I actually took delivery of the airplane in Florida. And it was summertime. This wasn't cold weather. Took delivery of the airplane in Florida, and it was at an FBO that was closed, and the guy was buying from it. He was there, but there wasn't anything else going on at the FBO. And I sumped the tanks, and I got I got water, just water, no fuel, on the first few samples in each tank. So I said, this is going to take forever with this little fuel drain thing. It holds just a few ounces at a time. So I asked if he could find me a bucket, and he did. He found me a bucket. I opened the fuel drain, and I drained and drained and drained, and I got approximately 5 gallons of water out of the right fuel tank before I was getting fuel. So, okay, let's go over the left side. Same thing. I got about 5 gallons of water out of that. So now I thought I was being smart. I let it sit for, 10 or 15 minutes and went and sumped it again, with the handheld sump. And it was fine. There was no water. So I took off, but now it was getting kind of late in the day, so I only went up as far as, I think, Charleston, South Carolina, and landed and spent the night. The next morning, I ordered fuel, but my curiosity got me before the fuel truck came, so I went with my little fuel strainer, and I drained the tanks. Guess what? Lots of water coming out. Now, I had flown that airplane from somewhere in northern Florida, I don't remember where, up to Charleston, South Carolina. No problem. It never missed a beat. So there was an FBO there. I went to the FBO and I said, you got a bucket? Sure. I drained another 2 or 3 gallons of water, gallons, not cups, not pints, gallons of water out of each of the 2 fuel tanks in that airplane. Let it sit, take a sample, no water, top it off, we're good to go. Okay. Took it off, flew the rest of the way up to Nashua, New Hampshire. Landed, it never missed a beat, nothing. Parked it for the night. Next day, it was in a hangar, didn't rain, went out, water. drained more water, probably another gallon or so out of each tank. Now, I didn't put the airplane in service as a trainer, but I kept going through this process and taking water out every day and flying the airplane myself. That was dumb. That was very dumb. I clearly knew there was still water somewhere in that system. How it was there, why it didn't come out, why it didn't cause a problem, I have no idea. And I've had people say, oh, the fuel bladders probably had wrinkles in them. That airplane does not have fuel bladders. They're just aluminum tanks like every other airplane. I have no idea, absolutely no idea why that water didn't cause a problem, where it was, why it didn't come out. But that was very dumb of me to have taken off from South Carolina with that airplane suspecting that there was, and I didn't really suspect. There's a cognitive bias called optimism bias. Oh, I got all the water this time, no problem, let's go. If I'd really thought it through, I would realize that, yeah, there's water there. And then when I got to New Hampshire, there's got to still be water in that system somewhere. It never burped. It never missed a problem, never missed a beat, but there was water in there somewhere. All right, lesson to be learned. If you got water, get rid of it. All right, I want to discuss one final accident that once again involves fuel contamination. This one takes a different turn than the usual common ones in which the pilot did not detect or remove the combination from the fuel. I'm not going to provide identifiable details in this accident because I don't want anybody to identify the people involved, either the deceased pilot, the previous airplane owner, or the technician who signed off the annual inspection. So you know it's going to be bad when I say that. Okay. Accident might be an example of one of the common accident causal factors, which is called lack of resources. That could mean not having the financial resources to properly maintain an airplane or to maintain pilot proficiency, or both. A corollary of lack of resources could be excessive frugality. I named that one. That's not an official term. And that would mean having the resources to financially take care of things that need to be taken care of, but not wanting to spend the money on the maintenance or on the pilot proficiency training to get there. All right, that being said, here's the story. Pilot was departing his home airport to fly to another airport to refuel the airplane. Witnesses reported that the airplane lifted off from the 1,800-foot-long grass runway. The left engine lost power, the airplane rolled left and impacted the ground inverted in a wooded area near the departure end of the runway. Rust-colored water was detected in various fuel system components from both engines. Further, the strainer drain lines and outer tank drains in both engines' fuel systems were partially blocked by rust-colored debris. Post-accident examination revealed evidence of long-term water contamination of both engines' fuel systems due to leakage past the fuel caps, which are normally replaced on an on-condition basis during maintenance. The engine failure was likely due to the water contamination in the fuel system, which was not detected by the pilot during the pre-flight inspection. Further, the leaking fuel caps most likely existed, but went undetected and or uncorrected. See, undetected and or uncorrected. Difference there, right? When the airplane's most recent annual inspection was performed, which was about 4 months earlier. The technician who signed off the annual inspection did not provide a copy of the completed checklist to the Ntsb. Maybe there wasn't one, but provided a statement that he inspected the fuel caps and that they were serviceable. Okay. A review of the airplane maintenance record revealed that the only entry related to the fuel filler cap since the airplane was manufactured was about 18 months prior to the accident, at which time the left fuel filler cap was replaced and an outer O-ring, but wait for it, of the incorrect dimension was installed. The Airplane Pilot's Operating Handbook and FAA-approved airplane flight manual indicates that during a pre-flight inspection, the fuel sumps in the left and right wheel wells and also the fuel drains in each wing are to be drained. Section 8 of the POH/AFM, Pilot's Operating Handbook Airplane Flight Manual, indicates that to open on a daily basis the snap-type fuel drains to purge any water from the system. These are Ntsb photos of the left and right fuel strainer drain lines. We can clearly see the blockage in the lines. Little, if any, fuel could be drained through either of these lines, and this is not likely a problem that just occurred. Not a recent problem. I doubt that any fuel had been drained through these lines in a very, very long time. So again, I want to stress, I don't know the reasons, and they may or may not include lack of resources or excessive frugality, but this airplane was clearly not well maintained. The poor maintenance did not come from a single decision or a single error. These photos indicate a lack of quality maintenance, at least of the fuel system, over an extended period of time. The Ntsb report details extensive post-accident inspection and testing of the fuel system, especially the fuel caps, with multiple findings of extensive corrosion, leakage, and faulty O-rings. The annual inspection had been signed off one day before the pilot purchased the airplane about 4 months prior to the accident. Okay, I'm going to editorialize a little bit here. After more than 50 years of flying and more than 40 years in the aviation business, I have purchased many airplanes, some for myself and some on behalf of my employers. I've learned from experience, buying an airplane with a, quote, fresh annual, unquote, is not always the best way to go. Unfortunately, we have annual inspections and we have endorsements for annual inspections. The airplane getting inspected just prior to the sale, with the inspection and necessary maintenance being paid for by the seller, might not be the most rigorous inspection. There are high-quality, reputable dealers out there who take pride in offering top-quality airplanes, but there are also technicians who will sign off an inspection with items that really need to be corrected, or at least would not be expected to remain serviceable until the next annual inspection. The buyer who is looking to save money by buying an airplane with a fresh annual and having a full year without having to do an inspection might be seeing, at best, a false economy, or at worst, a dangerous situation. In my opinion, the expense of a thorough pre-purchase inspection by a technician that you know and trust is very much well worth the money. None of us want to end up like this. The pilot owner of this airplane may or may not have been a victim of lack of resources nor excessive frugality. I don't know. But for whatever reason, he was either aware of problems associated with the fuel system and chose to ignore them, or he did not do pre-flight inspections. Whichever the case, it eventually cost him his life. And before we leave this, we can't determine the last time this pilot reviewed or practiced engine out procedures. The loss of an engine on takeoff, especially from a short runway, can be catastrophic if the pilot isn't razor sharp to respond. Many multi-engine pilots, unfortunately, take their flight reviews in Cessna 150s or 152s to save money. That's completely legal. That renews you in everything you're ready to fly, including helicopters, gliders, gyrocopters, whatever. Completely legal. But it is a false economy that might be a result of lack of resources or excessive frugality. I know that there are multi-engine pilots flying around out there that have had their rating for 15 or more years, and the last time they experienced an engine out was on their check ride for their multi-engine rating. So, all right, enough of my pontificating here. Any discussion on this one? I see one hand up. It might be from the last time. We'll see. It is John. John, I think I opened your microphone. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. Question for you on something, doing the fuel sumps for water. I have a 1965 Comanche 400, which I am about a year and a half into owning. I had the fuel system completely gone through during the pre-buy and subsequent annual that I had them do. My question is this: there is no way, and nothing in the POH that talks about, looking at the fuel. The drain is underneath the fuselage.
Yes. And
you drain each tank. So it's got 4 tanks. You just pull up on the fuel selector and drain for a few seconds, but there's no way to really know if you're getting, if you had water in there or if you did and got it out. I guess unless you put a pan under the thing.
Yeah, you probably do have to catch a little and see what's going on. That's not uncommon. It's not common just to that airplane. There are many airplanes that are in that situation. It's hard to do that. There are chemicals that you can buy. I've never personally used them, but I know there are things you can buy that react to water, and you can put some put it in the fuel and it'll turn a color or something. Maybe somebody else knows about that. I'm not sure, but there are ways. But yeah, it's stealthy and it's tricky. By the way, I love the Comanches. I envy you owning one of those. They were ahead of their time when they came out, and they got a very bad reputation because a lot of them crashed. But the problem was that pilots were trading their tri-pacer in on a Comanche, and it was a whole new world of flying airplanes, and they just were not prepared for it. It's a great airplane.
Yeah, this thing can get out of hand pretty fast.
Yeah, it's slippery. It'll kick you in the butt if you're not careful.
All right, I'll talk to my mechanic about the water issue. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll see what he's got there. All right, thank you. Let me you and we got a couple other hands here. We got Joe F. Joe, I think you're open here. Maybe not. Nope. Oop. Joe, are you there? I unmuted somebody else accidentally. Let me try Joe again. Try it again. Joe, are you there? Maybe you can unmute yourself. I clicked the unmute for you. There we go. Joe, you're live, I believe. No? No, Joe. Okay. I got a couple other hands up here. How about, oh, somebody's there. Somebody's mic is open. Is that you, Joe? Nope. Okay.
Got a Joe and a John Grish. Both those mics appear open.
Right. I think John we just talked to. John, are you, oops. No, they're not. All right. How about John H? John Harold, are you there? Problem is when I click on these, they move up to the top and before I can do anything. Okay, I think John, I think you're live.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if you would follow up on that personal experience where you interjected it, where you got those gallons of water over a long period of time. At the end of it, I didn't hear any explanation as to what may have caused all that water to get in the fuel. Could you follow up on that?
I wish I could. I have no explanation as to how all the water got in the fuel. You know, I bought the airplane. It had been sitting on a ramp in Florida, probably out in thunderstorms. The fuel caps, and the fuel caps were fine. In fact, I did have the fuel caps checked by maintenance, you know, back at my flight school, and they were fine. You know, I always thought that perhaps it might have been a victim of sabotage. I don't know the guy that I bought it from, but maybe he wasn't the most popular guy in the area. I don't know. That just seemed like an awful lot of water to get in the fuel tanks, unless the airplane was somehow parked with the caps off. Doesn't seem likely why that would have happened. I have no idea.
Did it eventually just stop? I mean, what was the final outcome of this?
Yep, eventually, even though I did not have the fuel system completely drained and flushed out, it did eventually stop, and after a few days that I wasn't getting anything out and we kept putting fuel in it, I put it in service and it went for many years.
Okay. I had water and fuel one time. It wasn't in my aircraft, but it was in one that I was using to instruct in with a student, pre-solo student, and we landed at an airport outside of Detroit, and we refueled, and the student came in with, I had taught him how to look for water in the fuel course and all that, and he came in, handed me the cup, and it was full of water. It wasn't fuel. And we eventually we didn't start the engine, we drained everything down, we got some help from a CFI that was also on the field. And then we had to get fuel and went to one of the other, it was a Baron on the field, and we drained that tank, and that guy didn't know it in the Baron, but he had lots of water in his fuel. It turned out it was being pumped out, I think, they never told me, but I think it was being pumped out of the dispenser somehow or other. The fuel got in the tank. But this is just a matter of that takeoff we had. We checked everything all around, what way we were going to go, where we were going to land. We had a golf course all picked, but it worked out fine.
Yeah.
And, but that's just because of very careful pre-flight And this was in the middle of the day. I mean, we'd already had a lesson, landed at this extra airport, went inside, and then the student brought me this cup.
Wow.
So it was good information for you with regard to thorough, complete, never-ending pre-flights.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's good. We're getting really close to the end of our time. Or we can maybe take one more. I see. Do you have anybody in chat, Wayne, that needs to? I can't see the chat today for some reason.
There was one question that went back a ways. Fernando wanted to know how long will water stop the engine after taxiing and run up? There was still water enough to contaminate the fuel and stop the engine, question mark.
Yeah, there's a lot of variations there on that one. It depends on a lot on the fuel system. Of course, how much water is there is a factor, but also it depends on the fuel system of the airplane. Sometimes we have very long fuel lines going to the engine. Sometimes we don't. It's really hard to say. One thing that I hope everybody got out of that was rocking the wings to get the fuel. That you really need to do that, to dislodge the water and get it down to the tanks. But you have to wait a few minutes for that to happen. It's not a very fast process. If you were to be able to somehow look in the tank, the water kind of slowly makes its way down to the drains. It doesn't just rush right down there right away. Yeah. All right. Maybe I think we have one more question we can take. Bob, I tried to open your mic.
Okay, am I up?
You are. Wow, it actually worked that time. Go for it.
Amazingly. Okay, I'm a CFI. We're pre-flight in Cessnas, and we got into the discussion because we typically check the oil, and the gasilator drain is in with the oil, so they pull out and they're draining the gasilator first. And then we got in the question, if there's water in the tanks and you pull the gasilator drain, you suck that water down into those lines, and then by the time you get up to check the wings, you don't see any water. So we're sort of getting into the habit of doing the wings first and then pulling the gasilator, so that if there's any water in the tank, it doesn't make its way down into the system and bypass the wing drains. Are we being silly, or is that have?
No, I think there's some merit to that. I also think, though, that with a Cessna 172 fuel system, there's not a lot of fuel line there, and if by the time you start it and taxi and do a run-up, if you had any fuel between the wing and the engine, you probably would know it, or you would burn it out of there. That's just a guess on my part, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with checking the wings first and seeing what's there. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all. I think we really do need to move on here based on our time. We mute the mics again. Try to. It doesn't work any better for muting them. It does unmuting them. But anyway. All right. Moving on. There we go. So in summary, we took a look at 3 types of fuel-related accidents: fuel exhaustion, fuel management, and fuel contamination. Much more we could say on this subject. Much more we could say on this subject. But it's all the time we have, and unfortunately, there are many more accidents that we could be discussing. But we like to avoid that little problem also. All right, we're going to skip that discussion. And in case you didn't know, Avemco, the sponsor of this series of webinars, offers a safety rewards program. Attendees at this event or in any of my other events, or those who take any safety-related education courses, can receive a percentage off their annual Avemco premium at the time of the quote or at the time of the renewal. So all you have to do is let them know, and I know they have a form you can fill out. They take your word for it and go from there. I have a website, genebenson.com. There are links to online courses. All the online courses there are free except for one, which is a Human Factors Ground School. And if you go to my website, you can click a link there to get 50% off that course if you want to take that. That's valid for all 3 wings credits, and basic level knowledge 1, knowledge 2, knowledge 3. I also have a free safety newsletter, which will be coming out this Friday if I do manage to get it done. No, it will be done. It's called Vectors for Safety. That's a monthly publication, but that's also the mailing list that I use to notify people of upcoming webinars and things like that. So I would encourage you to sign up for my newsletter. I also have some books out. If you search Amazon, Books by Gene Benson, they'll come up. There's also links to them on my website, genebenson.com. The 50 Years of Flying Insights is available both in paperback and Kindle format. And the other two are collections of articles that I have written over the years. Those are available just in Kindle format. All right. I always close my emails or sign my emails with, remember to please fly like your life depends on it. So I will add that to this one. I will say, please remember to always fly like your life depends on it. And thank you very much for attending the webinar. And again, thanks to Avemco for making these possible. And there are more webinars coming up. There were a series of 5 that I scheduled. I have 3 more that I'm going to schedule. They're not available yet, but they will be coming up. If you go to my website, genebenson.com, go to the Pilot Talk section. There's registration links to all the webinars upcoming there. So thank you all for giving up some time this afternoon to attend, and always fly like your life depends on it. And at that point, we will end.